Welcome to First Friday 5. It's the first Friday of the month, and we're watching 5 episodes of a TV show and then judging it purely based on those 5 episodes. Today's TV show is The Office. I'm Korbin, and joining me is...
My name is Kody Webb. I am also here.
Just trying to switch things up a little bit today, Kody.
I
Get
like
you
it.
off guard. Yeah. Make you introduce yourself. We're going to be talking about 5 episodes and the way we just selected those 5 episodes. Are we going to talk about the first episode, the last episode, the highest rated episode on IMDb, the lowest rated episode on IMDb, and then Kody got to pick one. So we'll go over which episodes those are for The Office in a little bit. But to just start, for our very first episode, Kody, you selected The Office. So tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, I did. And technically, I guess this is the pilot episode for this series. So fun thing there. But yeah, I feel like, we're going into a different genre here. Obviously, if you have seen some of our content before, we mostly cover movies, everything in the movie world. We do specific movie reviews, bunch of stuff. So you haven't seen that, definitely check that out. But since you're here, yeah, we're going to cover television, which is one of my favorite specific things. And I thought for the first episode, we had to go big. We had to go The Office, probably for our generation, one of the most popular shows, I would say, or at least sitcom or comedy wise, I'd say it's got to be up there. And yeah, it's just one of my personal favorites as well. So something I definitely wanted to talk about. Kind of just talking about my relationship with the show too a little bit. I believe the first time I watched it, I don't know the exact age, but it was from a fairly young age, somewhere in between like the 14, 15, probably in there. I think my first just, like introduction to it was probably just through cable television back in the day, Comedy Central, TBS, one of those. And then eventually I actually got some of the like old-timey CDs and watched a couple of the first seasons on my dad's laptop. And that's pretty much my formal introduction to it. But yeah, since then, I've probably rewatched it like over 10 times, which is pretty ridiculous. In the past couple years, I have slowed down a bit, obviously, because I was just getting sick of it. But this past year, I started rewatching it again because I knew that we were going to be doing this. I'll tell you what, I still really enjoy it. It's actually a lot more interesting now that like we are in the working world too. So I feel like once you like actually go and have to do a job every single day of the year, this show kind of, it has a different perspective on you when you watch it again. So I think that's super cool. But we'll get into a ton more stuff. But I know that you have a lot of exposure to this show as well, Corbin, right?
You mentioned not having watched it very recently, and I feel like I haven't rewatched the show in probably 3 years at this point. It was freshman or sophomore year of college, and obviously the availability and access of it being on Netflix for such a really long time, and then eventually leaving, and now it's on Peacock. I'm sure that partially had something to do with it, but I definitely watched The Office when it was on. I don't want to say that I watched it when in the first season because I was 5 years old and I don't think the jokes were quite working for me back then. But I remember tuning in, whether it be a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday night, different nights over the course of its run from 2005 to 2013. I remember tuning in and watching it. I remember watching it and Community and 30 Rock and Parks and Rec. There was a time when all 4 of those shows were airing. I think there's like a 1 year span where all of them like overlapped on the same night. Fantastic television right there from NBC. This is obviously, I think, the best one out of that group, out of, a lot of similar sitcom, mockumentary type stuff that this basically started a revolution for. But yeah, The Office is always a classic to return to. I've seen it a ton of different times. It was cool to kind of reapproach it through these 5 episodes, but I'm definitely excited to take a deeper look at The Office. I think going forward, we're going to pick maybe instances where it's a show that only one of us has seen, or maybe neither of us has seen, or we bring a guest on and it's a show they like. Typically going to focus on shows that have been completed so we can get that last episode. But as somebody who doesn't love to take the time to watch 9 seasons of a TV show when I could watch a bunch of movies, this is an opportunity for me to kind of get a taste of a show. And if I really like it, maybe you stick with it and you give it the full watch, or maybe you realize there's a good thing I only watched 5 of these. Let's talk theme song, Kody. Obviously, The Office, I feel like the intro and the theme is iconic, but it's so simple, which I think is what makes it great, right?
Yeah. And this is going to be a reoccurring category. I think one of the really cool things about television, just kind of the format that it has, that is very different from obviously movies, is first off like the theme song. Pretty much every show, currently running in the past, has some sort of variation on this. So we will keep, I think, a ranked list and try and keep track of all of these. But yeah, for The Office, I think it's an iconic one. Like you said, it is ridiculously simple. Just one, kind of it's like an Irishy song. I feel like Irish vibes, which the show obviously gives off, taking place in Scranton, Pennsylvania, large Irish community. At least in the show, I didn't do too much research on the actual town, but yeah, like I said, this for me is one of the top tier theme songs. It's kind of one of those that I don't think you can ever really get tired of. I'm not gonna lie, I usually do skip it now, but I mean, I've probably heard it over like 10,000 times. So I feel like I'm an exception. Excuse me, I'm an exception to the rule. But you really can't deny its greatness. I think it really has one of the most just catchy tones of all time, and I think it ranks up there with one of the best. But we'll definitely keep tracking and see where it ranks like all time. The deeper we get into the series.
Another show that I'm sure at some point in doing this, a couple months down the road that we'll cover is It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. And
Yeah.
it premiered the same year, 2005. And I almost see the Office theme as just the Always Sunny theme, but with a higher production value. And really, the beginning of the Office theme is really reminiscent of it. If you guys don't know, It's Always Sunny theme is just they went around fucking Philadelphia and they just shot shitty, old digital footage of the city, them driving around. They threw stock music underneath it. This is obviously like a written song, particularly for the show, but it opens with just like basically shitty shot stock footage of Scranton, Pennsylvania to kind of set you in the location of this. And then it transitions into like actual workday stuff of them in the office day to day, which I think is a fun spin on it. You kind of get to just see them interacting with each other. Something that I've, pointing out as we were watching these, does it feel like BJ Novak from like very early on is like highly billed as a starring role in the show? That seems kind of weird in hindsight when you look at the trajectory of it. He never felt like a main character, but he is always there. Was that kind of like surprising to you to think about, Kody?
Yeah, going back to the pilot, especially, there's tons of stuff where like it doesn't completely line up with the whole series. BJ Novak is one of those things. Him and Mindy Kaling both were pretty much premier writers on the show for around 4 or 5 seasons. So I think maybe he just wanted to shoehorn himself in at the beginning a little bit. He's also kind of that character in the first couple seasons who's like the new guy, and like he's kind of like who you put yourself into. Like, oh, if I was a temp in this office, like how would I react?
Yeah,
But
very
it was
much the
fun.
POV character early on. But I mean, with all these characters, they take arcs that are very interesting that I'm sure we'll talk about. But his is the most weird for like a main player, main cast member.
True. I mean, he goes from the temp to the boss, which is a lot of fun. But as well, you're talking about that stock footage in the theme song. I don't know if you know this, but that's actual footage filmed by Jim Halpert himself, John Krasinski, when he found out he got the role.
There you
He
go. I mean, it's
actually,
very similar to the Sunny thing. I'm pretty sure the actors, I
yeah,
mean, obviously the creators of their show, but they just filmed it themselves. Yeah, that's an awesome
yeah.
fact
I
for you.
think he was just on a camcorder and he just drove to Scranton with some of his friends and got some footage. So for them to put that into like the theme song, I think it's really cool and original.
So obviously, this is our first episode, so this has got to take the number one spot. But I think
Yeah,
it will be a tough one to topple. So it's setting
yeah.
the bar very high, very early for theme song. Let's talk about the 5 episodes we watched. So just hitting them, the pilot, season 1, episode 1. Then we jump to season 5, episode 13, Stress Relief, which is Kody's pick. Funny enough, a lot of these ended up being 2-part episodes. So we did watch the whole thing. You could see them as a part 1, part 2, but Stress Relief is the first one. It's 50 minutes if you watch the whole thing. And then season 7, episode 21, Goodbye Michael, which is the highest rated episode. Technically, I think it's tied or maybe second behind the finale, which we'll get to. And then season 8, episode 19, Get the Girl, is the lowest rated episode. No surprise there. And then the finale, of course, we're going to watch season 9, episode 23, also a 2-parter. So actually 3 of those: Goodbye Michael, the finale, and Stress Relief, all 2-part episodes. So maybe it's more First Friday 8, but these are the 5 that we went with. So let's start with the pilot, the very first episode. Kody, talk about it for me.
Yeah, the pilot, I already mentioned it, but it's actually really, really interesting going back and rewatching it, just because I feel like season one is kind of an anomaly in the show, in that it really doesn't line up with the rest of the character arcs or pretty much the story wise. And also the first specific episode in season one, the pilot, obviously, it's pretty much just a shot for shot remake of the British version of The Office. So they kind of didn't even have any creative ability to kind of try and do their own thing yet in that first episode. And as well, I say that it's not really Michael Scott in that episode, or really at all in season one, just because he has pretty much no redeeming qualities in that first season. That obviously changes, and they give him a little bit more of a subtler, I don't know, subtle personality, but kind of just a more likable guy and not a complete asshole. But yeah, that pilot episode, I don't know. It's gotta be like one of the lower ranking episodes for me, if we did rank them all. And yeah, it's not my favorite. But what do you think about the pilot?
We're not reinventing the wheel here. This show's been talked about so many different times, and clearly the changes to Michael Scott, whether it be his hairline or his personality from season one to season two, and therefore in moving forward, it's been talked about a ton of different times. But it is very clear the majority of his jokes are really just like weird sexual harassment, and not that that doesn't stick and stay with Michael Scott throughout the series, but at least there, like you said, there's some redeeming qualities behind the sexual harassment, I guess. But yeah, it's just kind of skeezy. Everyone seems to hate Michael, which is another thing. It's not even, people are either like scared of Michael, which in the case of Pam, she definitely is like not really vibing with anything he's saying, or just people like Jim who thinks he's a complete joke. There's a lot of cool stuff that gets set up very early on in the pilot, which is always surprising. There's a lot of storylines that they set up and continue on. Jan is in the first episode, which I think is always a surprising thing. It sets that corporate relationship up very early. Obviously, Ryan is introduced as a temp, so that relationship between Ryan and Michael continues throughout. Just Michael doing bad impressions and making outdated references, that's type of humor definitely sticks, and him being kind of an idiot. Pam's art, Dwight and Jim's back and forth, they're pranking, Dwight saying weird shit in confessionals, the assistant to the regional manager bit, and of course this overlooming fear of downsizing and an economic downturn, which this show came out in 2005. Over the next 3 years and the way our economy is run and people losing their jobs, I think this becomes all the more prescient in society and in the show itself. So a lot of cool ideas set up early. Also, another great thing, the end of the episode kind of has a twist. Oh, Pam Beesly, she's engaged, which then, of course, I mean, that's what this show really becomes about is Jim and Pam, more so than even Michael Scott.
Yeah, 100%. And I feel like the show in general, it's kind of about work, but it's more about like these characters and in a way like how they find love, which is kind of deep, but also it just has like the dumbest humor available. So I think it's a good mix. But as well with the first season, I wanted to mention too, and this episode shows it as well. Like the first season, all the endings of the episodes are like a real downer. Like in the pilot, it's like, oh, Michael's an idiot. He had no plan the entire time, or he's being an asshole to everybody. And season two, the first episode, it's the classic Dundies episode. They kind of have like a feel good ending at the end of that one, where they play Billy Joel music over Jim and Pam. So I think like that turned to more of like a comfortable ending, opposed to like a really uncomfortable ending, which is 100% this pilot episode. I think that really shows like how much the show changes from season one. And I mean, we're gonna jump straight to season five as well with the next quick. So there's a lot of stuff in between. I think the first episode is really telling of just like how much they really didn't know what they wanted to do yet.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, it's all about the changes they make from the British to the American version and the ways that they begin to differ from it. Like you said, the pilot is a base. If you watch the UK version of The Office pilot, it is basically shot for shot, line for line, very similar. There's obviously some adjustments made, but like it's basically the same show. And the humor in the UK and just kind of their general sentimentality is a little bit more negative and downer, and like it's kind of a darker humor. So like that translation of their characters in the Ricky Gervais version of Michael into a US sitcom just doesn't really make sense. And it doesn't really work for what a lot of people want to see, on a weeknight in America watching their favorite comedy show. So these changes were necessary and obviously gratefully to the benefit of the show. Why don't we go ahead and move over to season 5, Kody? Big jump. Is this the best season of the show? I think maybe so. I in watching this episode, obviously it's one of the highest, or it's Kody's pick, but it's also one of the highest rated episodes. I think it's like the third highest rated episode of all time with stress relief here. But I think it's just when everything perfectly hits the stride. All the character arcs are reaching the perfect head. You've got Andy before he's too annoying. You've got Michael before he's ready to leave. You've got Jim and Pam right before they get married. So there's still a little bit of like tension building to that moment. Stanley, like all the side characters have their own moments in this season as well as in this individual episode. So maybe it's not the funniest. Maybe season 3 or 4 is like the funniest season, but I definitely think in terms of just overall quality, I think 5 might be the peak for me.
Yeah, I think I agree with you there. And I was gonna say, I think just the season 3 through season 5 is 100% like the prime of the show, I would say. Just, I mean, it all revolves around, for me, that Jim and Pam, relationship. But I mean, for this specific episode, just talk about why I picked a little bit more too. This is like midway through, I think, season 5. But I think just all of the character arcs are at a perfect moment to create one of the most iconic episodes. The great thing about this episode is it never lets up. To go into it much more, obviously the cold open is Dwight running this fire drill, as he'd like to call it. But and then that's just insane commotion. There's so many iconic moments. I mean, Oscar falling out of the ceiling.
Angela throwing the cat. I mean, the thing is about this episode is it's got 2 different scenes that have been clipped and shared on the internet, maybe more than any other Office scene. The fire drill cold open and then the CPR scene are both just so iconic. And the fact that they're both in this one, set of 2-part episodes is incredible. First I was afraid, I was petrified.
Yeah, and oh yeah, and Stanley passes out as well, which is funny. But that specific scene of CPR training, that is my favorite scene, I think, in the entire series, which is pretty crazy because there's so much good stuff. But yeah, I mean, it starts out with just, simple CPR training, which probably happens, in offices all the time. And somehow it leads to just a complete group a cappella version of a classic Bee Gees song. If you don't know what I'm talking about, surely you've seen the clip. If you haven't, go watch it super quick. But yeah, it's great. And then it ends with Dwight making making a movie reference as well. Silence of the
Clarice.
Clarice. The little sound that he makes is perfect as well. Clarice. But
The cool thing about that scene, and it kind of goes back to what I mentioned of like all the small supporting characters kind of getting to have their moment. Like that scene is a great example. You get Kelly jumping up and doing her weird dance like while it's playing. You've got Stanley with the stress relief stuff. Phyllis, trying to help. Like every character gets to have a line of dialogue. They get to all mesh together. How would they each handle the CPR class differently? And then it's also fun because you mentioned, now being in a workplace, getting to be around, office members and a lot of those things resonate more so with us. But this I think is one that probably resonated even earlier, as like we had jobs in colleges where we had to take CPR classes, and there's something a little bit ridiculous about the process and having to go through it, and there's something inherently silly. And when you take these characters, obviously you're going to get some ridiculous moment like this. On top of that, you go to part 2, and we also have the roast, which is incredible that this episode also contains Boom Roasted. They really were firing on all cylinders for stress relief.
Yeah, and I feel like when there are the 2-part episodes, I feel like they're mostly pretty good. Like, I mean, we're gonna cover a couple more of them later, and I feel like for the most part they are like fairly high rated and respected. But yeah, the second half as well is a lot of fun with the roast. Obviously, Michael getting emotional at the end is super funny, and him feeding to the birds is a classic moment as well. But even going back to that CPR scene, I think that's like the best we get of Andy the entire series. And obviously, he's his first episode. He's introduced and he talks about, oh, he's in an a cappella group, and his singing is something I think that is maybe one of the most annoying things in the series sometimes. But in this scene, it fits perfectly, and I think it is the peak of his character. And also another great scene in the same episode is Michael talking to David Wallace in the high rise back in New York with Dwight. Um, just that pure comedy standpoint, I think, of just four people having a conversation, but the character of Michael Scott is so confused of where he's supposed to be at in the situation. I think it's amazing
The
writing.
blocking, the way that scene's shot, he gets up, he
Yeah.
goes to the other side of the room. He like puts his leg up on the chair and he's like, "What a city!" And then he's like, "Well, okay, Dwight, here's what we're gonna do." And then the
Yeah,
best part is we get the callback to it because after the CPR scene, they go back and they're doing it again, which is fantastic.
it's the double quick cut, and the second cut is even funnier on that time. But yeah, I think just these two particular episodes, just comedy wise, is around the peak of the episode. Just the joke, kind of creativity along with it is kind of why I picked it. But I did go through and try and make like my top 10 favorite episode list. So if you want, I can run through that super quick and talk about kind of why we came to Stress Relief. Yeah,
Yeah.
30 seconds here. The 10th episode, basketball episode, great one. The ninth one, Goodbye Michael, which we'll talk about. Eighth favorite one, Koi Pond. I mean, just for that scene of him falling in the koi pond. Number 7, severely underrated, Michael Scott Paper Company. Great episode. Number 6, Ranch Wars. Just the one line of, if you touch a hair on Stanley's head, we will burn Utica to the ground. Gets me every time. Number 5, Goodbye Toby. I think Michael's best song. Great rendition there. Number 4, Niagara. Obviously, Jim and Pam being married. Number 3, which was tough because I really wanted to pick this episode as well. Dinner Party. Again, maybe the most iconic episode of all time. But that's a classic. And then number 2 for me is Casino Night back in season 2, which is one of my personal faves. And then we ended up in Stress Relief. But you could have gone a lot of different directions here, I think. But just the nonstop, I think, comedy in these 2 episodes is what stands out.
Something that you mentioned with that first episode and the way it changes is that, episodes ending on a positive note. And this is another great example of that, where it's like, it's kind of an up and down episode. Michael kind of has, he's torn down and he gets to build himself back up a little bit. And Stanley, laughs and is sweet to him. But then you've also got that B plot of the Pam's parents' divorce that's happening throughout the whole episode. And then you get this sweet Jim and Pam moment at the end where it's like, oh, well, the reason he's officially deciding to go through the divorce is that Jim basically explained that, like, Pam is the only woman for him. He's never, even doubted that for a second. And that, if he doesn't feel that way, then he shouldn't be with Pam's mom, obviously. And, they do a great job of throwing in these really sweet Jim and Pam moments throughout the series to get us through some of the shittier Michael moments at times. And this is a good one of kind of ending on a high note of like, hey, Jim and Pam are still this positive couple, even if Michael had a bit of a rough episode. Boom, roasted. I love that. That's so great. Also, just in the other roast when Pam says, if it were an iPod, it would be a shuffle. That's a classic.
Yeah, I agree. The roast has just so many good one-liners, and then obviously Michael coming back to the office at the end and getting his lick back on everybody is great too. The Stanley line is probably my favorite. But yeah, no, back-to-back episodes, I think it doesn't get much better than that.
Let's jump over to season 7, episode 21, Goodbye Michael, which is the highest rated of the show for good reason. And it makes sense. This is probably one of the highest viewed episodes of the show of all time, definitely when it was airing. It's Michael Scott, Steve Carell's final episode before a brief cameo in the finale. Do you think they do a good job with Steve Carell leaving?
I think they do. And I think the reason that this is the highest rated episode, along with the finale, obviously, is I think it's the most emotional moments that they have, and kind of just the send off that they have for this. I mean, this is the main character of the show. There's no doubting that. I don't think so. To have him leave the show, obviously, it's a pretty big deal. But I think they do a really good job of kind of tying up all the loose ends with his relationships in the show. Um, Obviously, it gets really teary at the end. Him and Jim have a really cool conversation, I think, about just like, how good of a boss he was really in the long haul. And then obviously at the end, Pam just barely catching me at the airport. I think that scene is pretty creative as well, just because they kind of take the audio out of it. Obviously, in the airport, you can't just be walking through metal detectors with mics and stuff, mic packs or whatever at the time. But I think that's just a really cool way to end, his storyline, sort of that he is leaving just out of pure happiness with his relationship with Holly. And, yeah, I mean, those are the 3 characters, or I guess Dwight too, but every single, like, main character, I feel like he has just a really good resolution with. So, I don't know how they could have done it any better, if I'm being honest.
Obviously, with the mockumentary style, early on, they don't really break the fourth wall as much, or they're not really addressing it as much. I think that moment where Michael takes off the mic pack and then Pam runs in is the perfect utilization of like the style as content or as is for emotional purposes. You're taking what your method of making, your method of delivery, and you're using it in a positive way to tell story, to progress character development, which I think is really cool. They use it later on. There's the weird like Pam and the cameraman relationship thing that obviously isn't in any of these episodes, that I think is less successful. For this particular moment, it's a really cool utilization, and it's a cool like breaking down that barrier of like, oh yeah, this is like not just, this is like a documentary that they're filming. They wouldn't have him mic'd up in this instant.
Yeah. It is a cool meta moment, I agree. They probably take it a little bit too far as the seasons progress with the meta-ness. But yeah, you're definitely right. It kinda just takes you off guard, and you realize these characters are like it makes them feel more real, I feel like. And also just to continue on, like, I don't know, Michael's emotional arc of, like, it seems like even for the show, like, it makes sense that it's time to leave. He kind of even has, like, a freak out moment where he's like, "Oh, I don't know what I'm doing, like, I can't do this." And then instantly, when he gets on the phone with Holly, he's like, "Oh, I just need to hear your voice, like, I'm on my way soon." So I think, like, character-wise, even though it was Steve Carell just being like, "I'm making movies and stuff, I wanna move on," like, it made sense in the terms of the show too, which I think is really well done.
Michael's goodbyes and his gifts, I think, are so great in this because it's the perfect balance of his brand of being both an asshole but also being endearing. So like a lot of the gifts, like he's kind of being a dick, he's just giving away some of his junk in some of the instances. He at the end grabs like 3 people at once to do their goodbye, but like there's a certain like heartwarming nature to the way he goes about it that it just, is perfect Michael Scott, and it's the perfect send off. Obviously, not the last time we see his character, but extremely important. And the fact that they get that right and then are still able to make, another 2 seasons of average TV after that is pretty impressive. Will Ferrell's in this episode, which I think is a bit of
Yes.
a testament to, how huge this show was at its peak, that you get Will Ferrell to come in and just be a guest star for a couple episodes, pretend like he's going to take over Steve Carell's role. I don't know if anybody legitimately believed that there was like a long-term future there for Ferrell, but I'm obviously glad there wasn't, because I think most of his stuff sucks. And the fact that he kind of just goes off with Andy is maybe a testament to his character, because I think Andy starts to suck around this time as well.
Yeah. I would say this is absolutely kind of the start of the downfall of the show. I mean, you take out Michael Scott, it's not really The Office. Bringing in Will Ferrell, like you said, for a couple episodes, I think that's a fun move, even though, his character is not the best. D'Angelo Vickers, pretty forgettable role, I think. But I kind of have a soft spot for it. I don't hate his couple episodes just because the next couple seasons are really not great. But yeah, the whole Andy thing, we'll get to that in this next episode, but for Michael specifically, this was about as good as I think you could do.
The last thing I'll say about season 7, episode 21, it does contain the quote that I used for my senior yearbook quote, and catch you on the flippity flip. All right, let's move on to season 8, episode 19, and this is the lowest rated episode. And when I went and finally like was going back and watching it, and I saw which episode, I was like, oh yeah, this makes perfect fucking sense, because it's not the introduction of Nellie as a character, but it is the introduction of Nellie as a main player in the Scranton office. You've got Robert California at prime Robert California not doing anything. You've got Andy running off, being annoying, and it really starts his arc of like being extremely annoying. And basically, I think from this episode until maybe a little bit into the final season, like I just really cannot stand a lot of what happens. So it makes a lot of sense. Obviously, this episode opens with a cold open as well. I think we mentioned in the stress relief that being one of our favorite ones. This cold open, I think, is one of the weaker ones. It's just basically a balloon is like floating down from the sky in the warehouse. It's finally, and then even their reaction is just like, oh yeah, we kind of thought this would be cooler, but it's really not that exciting. A bit of a meta commentary that we're going to do a lame cold open, but I think for a show that has some of the best cold opens of all time across the board, it's definitely disappointing to see, in an episode how far we've fallen to a certain degree. But what do you think about this episode, Kody?
Yeah, I agree with kind of the IMDb rating here as well. This is absolutely one of the lowest points in the show. For me, it would probably be between this episode or the Gettysburg episode, which is equally terrible. But yeah, I think this one really just shows like how much we don't care about Aaron and Andy as well. Like I think this is kind of supposed to be the new relationship to, transitioning on. Obviously, Jim and Pam seem solid. The next season will question that. But in season 8, like the main relationship we're supposed to care about is Andy and Aaron. And yeah, this episode's god awful. So clearly we don't. And bouncing off what you said too, like Nellie, just her character sort of motivations kind of don't make sense. And also how she ends up in this sort of power position in the office makes no sense. So they kind of like throw even, sanity out the window. And then when you do that, it just turns into a shit show with Robert California. I mean, he's the Lizard King, so that's cool. But I mean, like, if those are supposedly the main power players in the office, and you don't really understand what they're doing or why they're there, kind of is going to make a terrible show, I think.
And
So, yeah, go ahead.
Robert California's like actions don't even really make sense. His character as a
Yeah,
whole is so all over the place. I don't think they really ever understood what it was or what they wanted to do with it. But in this episode, especially, he's just like, yeah, I'm just gonna roll over and be like, well, Nellie has this power over me, and I'm just gonna like whatever happens, happens. If Andy isn't here, I can't tell her no, which seems not like something Robert California would do from his interactions in other episodes. I mean, he is the Lizard King, like you said.
yeah. And in this episode too, it seems he's just like motivated by, I guess, Nellie's sexuality, which is weird because in like even his original episode where he's doing the interview, he's just coming off as like this intense guy. Like Jim is super intimidated by him. And for him to be this character now where people are kind of just like pushing him over and be like, no, I'm in charge. It kind of doesn't even make sense of like how we were introduced to him. So yeah, like I said, the Lizard King, that's a great line. But other than that, James Spader, I'm not too sure what he's really doing in this series.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, it's like a huge get. James Spader, like a popular
Yeah,
TV actor. So like they're like, okay, season 8, yeah, we're gonna do the joke Will Ferrell thing, but who are we actually gonna bring in to replace Steve Carell? James
yeah,
Spader, interesting choice for a comedy TV show, but it's definitely, I'm sure it was. They felt great about it at the network at the time. They're like, "Fuck yeah, the Blacklist, let's get that guy." NBC, man.
yeah, true. Keep on that NBC train. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, James Spader, even after this, I feel like it kind of derailed his career a little bit. I feel like he doesn't do that much anymore. But I mean, this show certainly didn't help. The Blacklist obviously ran for a long, long time. And he's
So he
been
did
in
the
tons.
Blacklist after this. I didn't realize that this
Really?
show ended in 20. The Office ended in 2013. The Blacklist started in 2013, and also is still running. Is still. Did you know
Yeah.
that the Blacklist is still happening? That's insane.
Yeah, that is crazy. I mean, I feel like eventually they're gonna run out of stuff, kind of like this show did. But I don't know, like season 8 and season 9, well, at least the first half of season 9, I think it's just bad TV. Yeah, there's really no other way to put it. Season 8 is probably some of the worst stuff I have seen. So if you haven't seen The Office and you're kind of just listening to this, I'd recommend just skipping straight over that and going to the back half of season 9. Yeah, this was a pretty terrible episode, but it was fun to go back and kind of just make fun of it.
It is interesting because while it is an episode that is so hated and is so bad, it is like a pretty important episode for like moving forward. Like the role that Nellie plays in The Office, you kind of need to know like how that happens. you kind of need to understand what's going on with Andy and Aaron up into this point. Like, this is a huge moment for their relationship going forward. Also, want to say there's some really fucking bad green screen stuff in this episode where Aaron, like, first confessional that Aaron does in front of the Florida house, she is like
Terrible.
clearly in
Oh
front of a
god.
green screen, which is so weird because the shot right before that is her in the yard, like throwing a newspaper or picking up a newspaper. But I guess they just didn't have enough time to like film the confessional. So they just did like a static shot and then got it late. It's really weird that
Yeah.
that's
It was
happening in season 8 of this show.
maybe it was like a rewrite or a reshoot or something. But yeah, that is just visually kind of off the top of the episode. You're like, what is going on? Like, I don't even understand why that would need to be green screen. But yeah, no, it's just bad altogether. So I agree.
Let's go to a more positive note and the series finale, season 9, almost 8 years. We finally, Dwight finally gets married, finds love with Angela. The show has aired at this point, and
Yeah.
it's an interesting of a 1 year later thing. To me, this one kind of felt like the weirdest to watch out of context. You know, when you spend all your time watching the show, rewatching it, you get through 9 seasons. It's a cool moment to get to the finale. When you just watch 4 episodes and then get to the finale, it's a little bit
Yeah.
jarring, some of these character arcs. Definitely curious to see how that plays out as we continue this series, if it'll always feel that way for finales. I do hate something I hate about this. Why is he got to fire Kevin and then like have this weird like Kevin redemption arc? Got to be his best friend. That's just strange. But
Yeah.
all in all, I think this is a good finale. I think it wraps up everything. It kind of hits all the major storylines. You get to say goodbye to most of the characters. Michael shows up. I would have appreciated more of an extended cameo beyond just like, I mean, how many lines does he have? Like maybe 2, 3. Like he says that's what she said. Like it's pretty minimal the work that he does in this.
Yeah. I think maybe he only has one confessional. Possibly that could be right. I don't know, but it's got to be less than like 10 minutes of total screen time, I would say. I wish they threw him obviously at Dwight's wedding, but I wish he showed up at the end when they're all just hanging out for the last time too. I think that would have been fun. But yeah, for me, I pretty much agree too. It is weird kind of watching it in this order, just because I feel like finales, and especially this one, like lean heavily on nostalgia, kind of remembering back to all the different seasons and all of your favorite moments and stuff like that. But for this whole season too, like I said, season 9 is pretty shaky. The last few episodes, though, the one in front of this one is assistant regional manager, which is really fun. Just throwback Jim and Dwight episode. And then, like you said, I feel like it's kind of risky to do a time jump for your finale. I think it took some stones to do that, but it just leaves like I guess more time for these characters to grow a tiny bit more before we say goodbye. And obviously, like seeing Angela and Dwight's wedding is the high point. I think of the finale. Their relationship, I mean, other than Jim and Pam, I think is one of the more complex and super interesting ones that we see from the beginning in season 1 and 2. And to have that wrapped up finally where they end up together, because I mean, going through like season 7 and terrible season 8, it was kind of up in the air if they would ever end up together. But I think that's the right move, kind of to do that in the end. Then obviously, like all Dwight's weird wedding traditions is always going to produce comedy as well. So I think it was a pretty great finale.
Yeah, it's cool. There's a lot of different relationships. We've talked about that Andy Aaron one. There's obviously Angela, Andy. There's Kelly and Ryan, obviously, which, comes back around. But I think it's really smart that in the final season and in the finale, we end with Dwight and Angela. And that's the one they focus on. And that's what they give us at the end. It would have really sucked if we got some like a Kelly or Ryan like wedding, or like even an Aaron, like something dumb, like, or a Nelly and Toby relationship.
Oh
This
man,
episode does bring back some sour memories about some bad storylines like that. Obviously, this is an extremely popular show. It was popular when it went off air. It obviously took a dip after Michael Scott, but in this finale, you've got a ton of guest stars. You've got Bill Hader doing an Bill Hader and Seth Meyers doing an SNL cameo, which is pretty cool. Obviously, same network, but still. Dakota Johnson plays like the new Kevin replacement. Rachel Harris is Angela's sister. Joan Cusack and Ed Bagley as Aaron's parents, just randomly. Malcolm Barrett as the new Stanley that Phyllis is trying to get fat. And they even bring back Meredith's son, who's been the same actor throughout the series, which is a cool touch as well as the stripper at the bachelorette party.
Yeah, that's a good touch, I think. And kind of just keeping with that continuity of the series, I think is cool as well. But yeah, for the finale, I think they did go all out, and that show is bringing back, Michael Scott. I don't know. I assume Steve Carell got a pretty hefty paycheck to do this because I assume that he didn't really want to. And even though he does have like, it's basically 2 scenes of him just showing up and then him dancing with Dwight.
One
I
day
mean,
on set. Come on.
yeah, it's still really good content. Like I really like it, but like you said, I just wish kind of there was more. But there are so many just like great tiny little moments with all the characters.
Well, yeah,
Even
like
Kevin in the bar,
well,
Mose.
Oscar gets in the limo and goes, he's like, oh, I don't know. I got to pretend like I was straight. And he gets in the limo and goes, what's up? Which is like a callback to the very first episode.
Yeah,
Michael goes up to Jim and goes, what's up? And, Jim does the what's up. That's like 7 years old. And then they kind of just stand there awkwardly, which is another great moment of like, you go up to talk to somebody at the office and then you're like, what do you talk about? How do you walk away from this scenario? But yeah, there's a ton of fun callback stuff like that. Good character moments, like you said.
yeah, and another one of my favorites too is Creed just like randomly living in the storage closet and then coming out at the end and playing some music. Because obviously in real life too, he was a member of like a band back in the day, and he never really got to show off that musical talent. So kind of just a subtle nod to that as well. But yeah, no, this episode I think is one of the best in the series, and I think like you said, I think it is like the highest rated one, like of all time. So to finish on such a high note, I think it's pretty tough to do honestly, and I think they achieved it.
As someone who's a film major and has shot some documentaries, quote unquote, if you're trying to edit, an ending together or a montage, like you kind of just have to like take what the people say and put it together. But the nice thing about this and the style is that they're obviously able to write everything. So every confessional gets to be the exact perfect piece of dialogue to create the perfect like montage of everybody saying their one last joke or funny character moment. So the ending is perfect, and obviously it's written to be perfect, which is great. But yeah, I love the little montage, the playback of all the final scenes or the old scenes. You see, Jim and Pam and their relationship through the years. It's definitely a good way to go out.
Yeah, no, I agree. It has like an epilogue at the end of the episode too, where they kind of just go one by one through everybody and sort of what this documentary, what is your time in the office meant to you? Because pretty much everybody's moving on from this moment. And it is heartfelt, kind of like the Goodbye Michael episode too. Like this is a super emotional episode, and to like leave you with that, I think the nostalgia really just kicks in at the end. So I think it's pretty brilliantly just structured as well for a finale.
A lot of TV shows and maybe some TV shows that we'll discuss on this series in the future. For their last season, they decided to do a time jump for the whole season. New Girl,
Yeah,
I think
Parks and
of
Rec.
Parks and Rec, they jump forward. I think it's really smart that they don't do the time jump for the whole season, that they just do it for this last episode. And you mentioned the ending kind of being a good epilogue. This whole episode is almost like an epilogue to the story. It's that fast forward, check in on everybody. The show's already aired. Everybody's live has been put on blast. And
Yeah,
I think it was a really smart way to finish things up.
yeah, and they kind of do the cool meta thing too, where it's like, oh, this is just the bonus episode for
The
the DVD.
DVD, yeah.
Yeah. So they do it in a fun way too. But yeah, I agree. I think the time jump too early can kind of just, I don't know, it feels just too off to be an entire season sometimes. So, but to do it for one episode, I think is a fun idea.
So let's move over to our top five. So for this, Kody and I have each basically picked a category to make up a top five for these episodes that we watch, for the 5 episodes. So my top five is my top five sweetest moments in the Office episodes.
Okay.
What's your top five?
My top five is the top five bosses at Dunder Mifflin from these episodes.
Okay, there we go. There's a lot of good, it's funny, we hit a lot of good ones. So I like that. I'll go first. So number five is Stanley laughing at Michael's roast. This is obviously during the stress relief episode. Their relationship throughout the series has been extremely contentious. And in this episode, it is them head to head, right? It's Michael. Well, Stanley has a heart attack because of Dwight's fire drill, but then Michael continues to stress Stanley out. And he is, the reason for the title stress relief, right? He at one point wears a heart rate monitor that, shows how stressed he's getting. And as Michael steps away from him, it gets less. And as he gets closer, he becomes more stressed. But finally, after doing, Michael gets roasted and then Michael goes back to roast everybody else, Stanley gets to have his moment where he's laughing, making Michael feel good. It's like they finally made up. Definitely a very sweet moment. Number 4, goodbye, Michael. Michael's leaving. He's saying his goodbyes to everyone. There's a lot of great goodbyes, but my number 4 pick for this is going to be Michael's goodbye to Aaron, particularly because Aaron's talking about, I need, a biological mother. I don't know my mom. I never know what to expect. And Michael says to her, well, you don't need a mom because you've got my phone number, which I just think is a really heartfelt moment. Aaron is a character that is pretty hit or miss for me throughout the show. She'll, never be Pam, obviously, at the receptionist desk. But I think this is a really good moment for her and for Michael. So that's going to come in at number 4. Number 3 is going to be Jim's moment with Pam's dad, his father-in-law. Obviously, we don't get to actually see this moment on screen, but Pam gets to relay it to us through, asking Jim, what did he say? And, this is that through line of Jim and Pam being super romantic, being a good relationship. This shows that Jim truly does love her and cares about her, even, in a hard moment for them when, divorce is happening around them and loss is happening. And it's obviously before their relationship is really tested, but it's an extremely sweet moment, Jim showing how much he loves Pam and, saying that he always wants to be with her. Number 2 is Michael's goodbye to Pam. We've talked about it a little bit, but of course, the leaving the airport, having no audio is extremely smart. I think it creates the emotion and it becomes an even more emotional scene when we don't know what's being said. It's, them just embracing. Obviously, she's gone the whole day, and Michael's kind of like, I need to say goodbye. Where's Pam? Where's Pam? And finally, as he's about to board the plane and say goodbye, she, runs up and gives him a hug behind the gate, which is really cool. And then finally, of course, at number 1, it's got to be Michael as Dwight's best man. He shows up at the wedding. There's not a lot of scenes, but for a finale, to bring back your main character who's been gone for so long and have him play such a pivotal role in this huge wedding that you've been building to, I think that's really great. So those are my top 5 most heartfelt, sweetest moments in the 5 episodes of The Office.
Yeah, I concur. That's a great list. But yeah, on to my list. So basically, like I said, I'm just going through the top 5 bosses at Dunder Mifflin for these episodes. Coming in at number 5, you mentioned him earlier. I said I got a soft spot for him, so you had to make the list. D'Angelo Vickers, the classic wheelbarrow.
Bad pick.
I think he's in like 2 episodes total, and he exits with a brutal basketball injury. So got to give him props for that. Also, in the show, he got the job because he helped Joe. Her dogs ran away from him, and he just grabbed him. And then him later on, yelling at dogs with Andy in the shelter. It's pretty funny. He's got a cool vibe to him as well. His office, I think, is one of the more unique ones for a boss. So shout out to D'Angelo. Moving on to number 4, I'm gonna slot in season 1 Michael Scott here. Really just a complete asshole. Yeah, really no redeeming qualities, like I mentioned earlier. But I think just the jokes have to put him ahead of D'Angelo. D'Angelo really doesn't add anything to The Office other than people just sucking up to him. And at least Michael Scott, he knows who he is, and that's who he's going to be. Also, the receding hairline is iconic, and they should have kept it. Coming in at number 3, it's basically the same thing, but I'm going to go with Andy/Nelly from the obvious season 8 episode. I don't really, care about this season or these characters, so I'm not even going to make a joke about it. Coming in at number 2, we have season 7 Michael. I think this is prime Michael. Like I said earlier, really just emotionally, this is probably the best that we'll ever see this character. And maybe at his funniest too. Once you're at that point where he's in a committed relationship and he really accepts, everything about himself, I guess, all of his flaws, you could say. Maybe that's when he's at his funniest. So I really like that. And coming in at number 1, the best boss in Dunder Mifflin history, it's got to be season 9 Dwight. I mean, this man has worked his entire life he has, put everything in to achieve this one goal and become the best damn branch manager this company's ever seen, other than the time where he fired a gun in the office, but we won't talk about
Well,
that.
see, that's the interesting thing, not to butt in here, but like we get to see the like attempts. He's always been
Yeah.
trying for this position. It's another one of those character arcs that we finally get to see finished, which is really cool. And it's cool that he's finally mature enough and at a point where like he actually is a very good boss and he is the person who should be running Dunder Mifflin. He's basically
Yeah.
brought it back from the brink. They get get a bunch of clients that they lost in the past. And yeah, season 1 or season 9 Dwight is definitely the best manager.
Yeah, like you said, I mean, he's basically saved the company at this point. And basically all of his employees love him. I mean, Jim, he's even come around on him, and pretty much they're best buds. So I think manager wise, especially in these episodes too, like it's pretty obvious he's got to be at number one.
Cody, if they were to bring back The Office, or if they were to do a pitch or a new season or a spinoff, what would you want to see out of a new Office property?
Yeah, I think this was a little bit difficult. I think other shows it may be a bit easier, but this one is kind of the one where it's like the show ran its course and probably went on a couple more seasons than we needed. And obviously they did try to have a spinoff with Dwight specifically, which I kind of like that episode too. I'm kind of a sucker for it.
Dwight's Farm.
Yeah, Dwight's farm. His family's kind of interesting. His cousins are all just complete idiots, which I think is pretty comedy wise. But what I'm going to pitch today, it's kind of an in between season. I'm going to call it The Office, the summer special. And obviously, like the running thing in the show is the camera crew has the summer off, so we do have some missed time pretty much in between seasons sometimes. And the specific summer that I do want to see is in between season 2 and season 3. So obviously the end of season 2 is when G puts it all on the line for Pam, gets rejected, blah blah blah, real gooey stuff. But I kind of want to see like the process of him transferring out. I kind of want to see Michael's reaction. I kind of want to see like Dwight celebratory, and kind of Ryan getting promoted into that new role. I think would be very cool to see as well. But kind of just there's a lot of raw emotion that we didn't get to see there. So I kind of just want to pitch maybe a 10 episode mini series. We can even make it now. I mean, nobody's really that old, but it would be technically like a prequel in betweener of the seasons, if that makes sense.
It's been like 16 years since that would have taken place. So I think people are looking a little older.
We could do the De Niro de-aging thing.
There you go. There you go.
Yeah.
We'll Irishman the whole thing. Peacock's got the budget for that for sure. My pitch is, I think the character, if we were going to follow somebody, it would probably make sense to like follow Jim after this and doing like an athlete / I guess athlete is what it gets renamed as spinoff, where it's like basically The Office, like a mockumentary, but at a sports media company. Like I'm surprised that hasn't been done. Like it maybe like kind of in like the Entourage range, like world a little, but I think sports media. And if you're not gonna have Jim, make it just Craig Robinson as like your main character, in athlete in Austin, bring in a cast of characters. You could have real athletes come in and play themselves at different points, like they do with like Ryan Howard, and different stuff. So I think that would definitely be a really cool spinoff. Or even if you're not doing it in the Office universe, like I think doing like a sports media world. I mean, as somebody who works in sports media, I guess it's easy to say that, but I definitely think that would be a cool, they've done it in a store and they've done it at, a parks department. And they've, done it at a school. Let's get the sports media one. Just don't make it fucking Barstool. That's all I can say.
Fair. But I do like that idea actually. And what they should have done is do that earlier and keep Jim, Pam, and keep Daryl. Because I mean, honestly, like in the later seasons, those are probably 3 of the best characters in the show.
Easily. Daryl becomes one of the best easily.
Daryl's very underrated. We have not talked about him enough. But I like that pitch. I would watch that.
Yeah. All right, Cody. We've watched 5 episodes. Obviously, we've seen more. Would you recommend watching more than 5, less than 5, or just stick with these 5 going forward?
Yeah, I really liked it. It's kind of like our ranking format at the end. I would recommend to watch more than 5 episodes. Big surprise. But more specifically, just to give you a rundown, if you haven't seen The Office and you want to get into it, I'd skip season 1, other than the basketball episode, just because I like basketball.
I like Diversity Day. I'll admit I'm a Diversity Day fan.
Mr. Brown, I don't know, but also the Kelly slap, I don't know. I feel like that doesn't hold up great either. But yeah, season 2, amazing. We've already said it too. Season 3, season 4, season 5, I think the prime of the show directly there. After that, it's a wash, but I would recommend specifically like those 3 seasons. So I'd say obviously like go watch the show. Yeah.
I definitely agree. Watch more than 5 episodes. I think you could. I think you should watch season 1 because I think it's still there's important stuff that happens that gets set up.
Yeah, it's
But
obvious.
you can stop when Michael leaves. There's,
Yeah.
obviously it's worth the next 2 seasons to varying degrees have, some good moments, some bad moments. But if you stopped at Goodbye Michael, you really wouldn't miss out on anything too great, I don't think. So yeah, definitely watch more than 5 episodes. And I'm sure most people listening to this have because it's The Fucking Office, one of the most popular shows of all time.
Yeah. True.
Well, let us know what TV show you guys want to do next, and if you want to come be a guest. But we'll see you next month for our next First Friday 5.
Heck yeah. Stay Kevin.
Peace.
Bye.
What you just said is one of the most insanely idiotic things I have ever heard. At no point in your rambling, incoherent response were you even close to anything that could be considered a rational thought. Everyone in this room is now dumber for having listened to it.